Several years later, and I still have some questions. Hey, hockey fans, welcome in to another episode of the Rush Hockey Podcast. We had a video talking about the Edmonton Oilers' top 10 best draft picks that they have made all time. Some of you have made some comments on some players that were not included and some players that were perfectly included. And I thank you so much for that engagement. Today, we're going to go over a few head scratchers of draft choices that the Edmonton Oilers made. We're going to talk about the top 10 worst draft picks that the Edmonton Oilers made. And like always, if you have any comments, please don't hesitate to leave them in the section. And I will provide some questions for you guys in the descriptions. Feel free to answer those. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch and support the channel and helping me grow to get to 100 followers. They reached that goal. We're at 63 out of 100, so we're almost there. So without further ado, let's get started with the worst draft picks all time by the Edmonton Oilers. Starting this list off at number 10 was none other than Marc-Antoine Pouliot. He was drafted 22nd overall in the 2003 NHL entry draft. He had a very good junior career with the Oceanic, and he tallied 114 points in his final season in the Quebec Major Hockey League. However, when he tried to get into the NHL, it wasn't the smoothest of transitions. Over parts of 5 seasons and 192 games, he scored only 53 points with just 21 goals. He was not consistent for the Edmonton Oilers, and he wasn't able to establish himself as the premier center for the Oilers, the thing that the Oilers actually needed, and that led to his eventual departure from the Edmonton Oilers. Now, there were a lot of injuries that he sustained over his career. However, it weighed heavily on him to be able to develop that top 6 role that the Oilers were so desperately searching for during that time. Now, here's the hurtful part of that pick, and it leaves me scratching my head to this day. The Oilers had passed on several good players in that draft. One of them currently is on the Edmonton Oilers, and he was selected by the Anaheim Ducks, 28th overall. For those of you who know that information, drop it in the comments. Let me know who that is. Coming in at number 9, we have a very skilled center from Finland named Niinimaki. He was selected 15th overall in the 2002 NHL entry draft. There was a lot of question marks behind his selection because nobody knew how his skills would translate over to North American hockey. Unfortunately, with his career, there was a lot of injuries and a lot of inconsistency. He never ended up playing a game in the NHL, and he spent most of his career either in Europe or in the Finnish league. Here's what's crazy. That year, the Edmonton Oilers potentially could have drafted players like Alexander Semin or even Cam Ward, but they didn't. Could you have imagined how that would have happened, how the fortunes would have changed if the Edmonton Oilers had one of Alexander Semin or a goaltender that they desperately needed? I guess we'll never know, but we can say that number 9 pick did not service the Edmonton Oilers very well. Now, we're going to go back a few more years, and we're going to talk about 1994 in the NHL entry draft. Selected 4th overall was John Bonsoir. Who? That name to me, I don't know who that is, and I would be very surprised if a lot of you knew who that was. He was an NHL entry draft pick that was selected based off of his size and his evident skill at the time. The Oilers could have used that size and skill back then, and it would have been perfect. However, in 21 games with the Edmonton Oilers, he managed just to have 2 points. There was a lot of struggles with his work ethic to become a full-time NHLer, and it just didn't stick at all. That struggle then continued into the AHL, where he was traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So thank you at the time, Tampa Bay, for taking him. I appreciate that because he didn't do anything for us. So he was then traded to Tampa Bay, and he wasn't able to translate his potential success, potential, I say potential very loosely, into the NHL, and he was turned out to be a significant disappointment of a pick. Considering that same draft year, the Oilers could have gone out and gotten Jeff O'Neill, or a Oilers legend that they did have in Captain Canada with Ryan Smith. Imagine if they had selected Ryan Smith a little bit sooner, they could have used that pick for somebody else. We all know that the Oilers for a very long time have been struggling on the defensive side and struggling to get defensive players. And I remember in 2007, the Oilers had the opportunity to select potentially a good defenseman or maybe even a better forward. But they didn't. At number 7, we have Alex Plant. I remember that draft. I remember when that name was called. And instantaneously, I was shocked because that was not the right move by the Oilers to make that pick. I don't know where the scouting reports came in saying that he would have been okay, but he just didn't work out for the Edmonton Oilers. He was expected to be on that blue line and stabilize what the Oilers needed back then. He didn't do that. However, injuries kind of took over his career, and he never really developed into an NHL player. He barely scratched the surface of the NHL by just playing in 10 games for the Oilers, which didn't amount to anything, and he didn't really make a progress in his development. He spent most of his career in the AHL, which I don't even think that was viable. I'd have to look at the stats on that, but after the AHL, he moved to Europe and continued his career there. His lack of progress in his development was actually very disappointing, considering in that same draft that the Oilers selected Alex Plant, they missed out on prolific goal scorers like David Perron, or even a strong center like Max Pacioretty. I guess the seeds were just planted in the wrong spot. Now, coming in at number 6 is somewhat of a fan favorite. He was liked by the fans. He wasn't really hated, but then he was also hated and not really liked. And it was a 50-50 with him. He was a good player. However, he didn't meet the expectations of being a top 10 selection. In 1996, the Edmonton Oilers selected 6th overall Boyd Devereaux. He played really good hockey and he had a pretty decent career. However, it wasn't for the Edmonton Oilers. He really branched out, most notably for the Detroit Red Wings. In 627 games, he had 112 assists and 67 goals. It's a respectable amount of points for a player in the NHL, especially being drafted to the Edmonton Oilers or playing for the Detroit Red Wings. However, for a 6th overall pick, that level of production just didn't really add up to what it was worth. Here's the best part. In that draft, the Oilers passed up on stars like Ruslan Saleh and Derek Morris, 2 really good defensemen for their careers, in my opinion. That's what made this pick disappointing. And I know there's some Boyd Devereaux fans out there. I love him, but I had to put him on this list. The next player on the list at number 5 is a player that a lot of fans should know by name, and that is Jani Rita. Jani Rita was selected 13th overall in the 1999 NHL entry draft. He was a Finnish winger who was highly skilled and showed a lot of potential in the Swedish Men's Liga, or Swedish Elite League, or SM Liga, however you want to describe it. His transition, however, to the NHL was not the best at all. He was unable to find his scoring touch, and he was not able to crack the Oilers lineup as effectively as would be expected of a player of his caliber. In 66 games for the Oilers, he only had 18 points, and he was not able to get into the lineup or show significant amount of scoring touch. He then went to the AHL where he spent a lot of his time. And here's what stings even more. Edmonton Oilers fans, I'm sorry, but there was a pick that was made after him. And that pick, well, it wasn't directly after him, later on in the draft. That pick was none other than Martin Havlat. Could you imagine if the Oilers had picked Martin Havlat instead of Jani Rita? Definitely would have been a whole different offense. This next pick goes all the way back into Oilers history, and it's long before some of you viewers were even born. And if there are some viewers that were born during this time, then awesome, because I kind of know it. In 1985, drafted 20th overall, Scott Metcalf. He was supposed to be a gritty offensive forward who could chip in offensively and score a few points for the Oilers. However, in 19 NHL games, he scored 1 point. So he didn't pan out to what the Oilers envisioned, and it was really bad considering that year, later on in the draft, players like Joe Nieuwendyk and Mike Richter were available. That kind of stings a little bit. You guys remember players by the name of Brendan Morrow or Scott Hannon? I do. And the Oilers had every opportunity to select them, but they decided not to. They went for a player 14th overall in 1997, Michael Reason. That was his name, and that was who the Oilers selected. Unfortunately, he did not have a very long NHL career, and he definitely did not have a very successful long NHL career. He played only 12 games and scored 1 goal. But the good side is he went over to the Swiss National League and had a very, very successful career over there. I guess his game just didn't translate over to the North American style, and it just was a pick that, who knows, we could have had Brendan Morrow or Scott Hannon. At number 2, the Oilers took 6th overall in 1995, Steve Kelly. And he was a highly touted prospect whose game never translated to the NHL or didn't have a fruitful career for the Oilers. And I feel like we're beating the same drum here. All right. This is the top 10 worst draft picks by the Edmonton Oilers, and there is a consistent thing here. The Oilers would go for somebody promising, and it just would never pan out. In 27 games for the Edmonton Oilers, he recorded 5 points. I think that's better than the last two guys who only had 1 point. But he wasn't able to establish himself in the NHL, and he bounced around from team to league, and he spent a lot of time in the minors. Here's what the stinger is, because with every other pick that I've told you, they passed on other future stars. Well, with number 2, the Edmonton Oilers passed on Shane Doan. And, interesting fact, the Oilers passed on a player that was absolutely one of the faces of the franchise for a rival team. For those of you who have stuck around in this video for as long as you have, please let me know who that player is and who I'm talking about. I'll give you a hint. Edmonton guy. Have we made it? Have we made it to number 1? I think we have. It's the worst overall pick. I think it's a consensus, unanimous decision by a lot of Oilers fans. If you guys disagree with me, let me know. But taken 1st overall in 2012, we all know who it is, Nail Yakupov. He had so much potential going for him. He was amazing for the Sarnia Sting. The Oilers went ahead and they fell for this player, and they take him 1st overall. In the first season, it looked like it was going to be promising. He had 31 points in 48 games. I mean, it was a lockout shortened season, but he showed that he was able to be that number 1 pick, and I think that was a pretty good start for his career in the NHL. However, after that, he had problems with playing defense. He had problems with scoring consistently, and he just didn't develop into the type of superstar player that the Oilers were expecting to get when they drafted him 1st overall. Well, I digress. In 350 NHL games, he only scored 136 points, and then he left for the KHL. And I think the worst part of that pick was Philip Forsberg was also selected in that draft. And so was Morgan Riley. And tell me, do you think the Oilers would have been better if they might have selected one of those 2 players? that I'm at a loss for words. This one still leaves me scratching my head as to why they picked Nail Yakupov. But that's your list right there. He's number 1. So there you have it, folks. That's the top 10 worst draft picks of the Edmonton Oilers in their entire history. And remember, drafting has always been a little bit of a gamble, and sometimes you get the players you want, and in this case, you get the misses and you don't get the players you want, which can be very depressing when you're a fan of any franchise, for that matter, that drafts poorly. But with that being said, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to enjoy the sun. And I'm going to look at the future of the Edmonton Oilers because it has been bright in recent years and going forward. If there is anybody on this list that I have forgotten, please drop it in the comments and let me know. If you agree with the list, also let me know. And don't forget, the most important thing that helps this channel grow is you hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.